Well, I was asking Charles and Skip about sentencing before the verdict was read,
Man, really?
because I had to mentally prepare for, you know, the worst. And so I was sitting there as the jury's walking in saying, who are we calling first? You know, let's look forward.
Did that come from just not trusting the system, or was it just that you just couldn't go there to think
I didn't.
this could end the right way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have faith in the criminal justice system,
You do.
but it doesn't work for everybody. And thank God I had a lawyer who cared as much as Skip, because then it could have turned out completely different if it would have been any other number of attorneys. So
I mean, that night, that could have turned out different. Does that cross your head that you could have been really hurt? You could have died.
yeah,
Somebody else could have died.
but for the grace of God, I'm still walking here. These are the same boots I was wearing.
Same boots that day?
Yeah, my friend
Okay.
cleaned them up for me and I wore them out of jail. They were covered in blood, but same bracelet and ring I was wearing that night too. So I've been wearing them every day since
Every
then.
day?
Yeah.
Does it take you back to that night, though?
No, no.
Good.
They helped me rediscover who I was before that night.
Right.
That's where I'm trying to get back. And
I think for a lot of our viewers, this is the first time that they get to hear your voice. You know, they get to see you outside of the courtroom. Do you think about that night? Do you remember it?
I remember bits and pieces, and a lot of it has been jogged by sitting through all the testimony and seeing all the pictures and 16 months of thinking about it every night. I had flashbacks from that night for several months, because the jail's a really loud place, and every time a door would slam, I would jump and jump out of, you know, the bunk or something. So, but I remember pieces of it. So
That fear or that looking over your shoulder at all times, does that come from your years of being a Marine, being in a war setting? Where does it come from?
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it's obviously that's contributed to, you know, how I react whenever I get that fight or flight.
Yeah.
I guess adrenaline rush, and definitely affects how you.
Have you been diagnosed with PTSD, or have you self-diagnosed yourself with that? What do you think is going on?
So I've been diagnosed, and
You got a VA rating.
I have a 70% PTSD rating from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I was trying to get into the VA. It took 2 years to get my claim approved, and then I showed up to, because there's two separate arms of the VA. So when I got that, I went to the healthcare side and I showed them the paperwork, and they told me to go home and they'll send me a letter. And then a couple months later, in October, I started calling them because I didn't hear anything back. And they told me that I was denied. And I was like, I've got all the paperwork, you know? And so on November 7th of 2013, which is the Wednesday before this happened, I was on the phone with the VA, just pissed off because they keep turning me away, and I've got all the right paperwork. And they said, well, you're not on our system, so you're just gonna have to show up and walk in. And that's what I was planning on doing that week after Veterans Day, yeah, because they were closed.
So then after the phone call, after that night that happened, the standoff, then you wake up in jail. And what are you thinking? What's going through your head?
So, I mean, I it was a really bad dream. And this guy was there talking to me the very next day on Veterans Day, saying, "It's going to be all right. I got this."
So you return home, serving your country. Veterans Day, the last place you would expect to be is in jail.
Yeah, that's definitely wasn't on my to-do list.
No. But how, I mean, what are your feelings as far as, are you angry, are you upset at the system, knowing that you could have gotten help much sooner had they listened to you, this could have been prevented? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't really want to dwell on what could have happened, because right now I have an opportunity. And so I'm just taking each day, day by day, and looking forward to rebuilding myself in a positive, direction. And that's why I'm checking into the VA tomorrow. So, I could get mad about it, but that doesn't really, it's not going to help me moving forward. And that's the direction I'm trying to stay, is going forward. So.
Do you think this sends a message, and you can jump in this on the question too, Skip, a message to the police department in Austin, really everywhere?
I think it definitely sends a message. Whether they hear it and do anything about it, I don't know. But
what would you want that message to be?
I think the message ought to be that it's time for the Austin Police Department to evolve its mental health approach to dealing with citizens with mental health issues in this community. Just about, I would say probably 60% of the issues that occur in jail and on arrests occur with people who have some sort of mental excuse me, with people who have some sort of mental health issue, whether it's schizophrenia, paranoia, bipolar, or something as not so widely understood as PTSD. And we need to evolve, I think, to start incorporating more mental health officers. Right now we've got a very small cadre of these folks who are on the roster at APD, and I think that roster needs to expand significantly given the number of soldiers we know are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, right there at Fort Hood. And we know that the city is growing at an alarming rate, the fastest growing city in the country. And I think so we need to start ridding ourselves of some of the old anachronisms and some of the old constraints that have hampered APD's ability to approach these kinds of issues with compassion and consideration and conversation. I think those are the 3 C's I think that have to be employed. If you deal with everybody with compassion, you give them consideration, and then you communicate with them, I think the standoff situation is much more likely to be resolved.
From an officer standpoint, when you think about that, and maybe you know that these are someone, a person who has dealt with war-like settings.
Sure.
Is it a police officer's job to protect themselves as well?
I can't give them any greater credit to our local law enforcement. I think quite highly of them. We all abhor these kinds of situations. I believe that police officers in general are trying to do the right thing in Austin. The problem is that if you mishandle one incident, it can leave a taint, if you will, on the reputation. It can kill a person. So I'm afraid that the police department just has to evolve and become much less confrontational and combative with the public. And Art Acevedo comes from Los Angeles, so I think he understands the old phrase that LAPD uses, which is to protect and serve. And I think that needs to be the new focus of Austin's police department, to get back to protect and serve, as opposed to it's us versus them, or I have no duty to retreat. There's no reason why every incident requires them not to retreat. sometimes retreating gives space and time for things to get resolved. And even though the Texas law gives them no duty to retreat, it's just not always a smart thing to do.
Even if they think the person inside may be a danger to themselves?
You know, it's a complicated situation when you're talking about what's going on inside somebody's house and there's no other individuals inside that dwelling that they know have are in danger. And so it complicates things. You know, as you add different factors in, you can make the problem much more difficult to resolve in simple terms. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to talk people down off the ledge, which is what police used to do, like in the 80s and the 90s. We talk a guy down off the ledge. And that's what we have to do here. We've got to readopt that, talk them back down. And I think things will resolve in a way that's much more beneficial to the entire public.
So just how do we change it?
Well, I think that when I say that APD needs to evolve into the 21st century in how it responds to mental health calls, I think it requires a comprehensive look at the entire system, which is already underway. And I applaud Chief Acevedo for doing that and the rest of the mental health community for doing just that. But we have to adopt something even personally ourselves, I think individually, realizing that there's a contest for all of this resources. The county's trying to divert money, and they can divert problems over to the VA system. The VA has got limited resources and the growing population. And I think there's even an individual level where we have to look at why are we calling the police for somebody we can go check on ourselves.
Okay.
If it's our friend, I think then on an individual level, we should take the personal responsibility to go check our friend out. When you call the police, that's escalating things to a place that might not wind up good depending on the miscommunication, say in Gene's case, that occurs. I think we have to take up the cause of our neighbors. Like, you know, I think the old phrase was, it takes a village. And I think it does take a village. So if, you know, if I'd have known Gene back in the day, or if one of my soldiers when I was a commander would call me and say, hey, I need to talk, boss, I would probably grab a 6-pack of beer and get on my motorcycle and ride over, then we would have a conversation before I would call the police to resolve something. Because I don't want to waste the police time. That's a valuable resource. We got big crimes going on across the and we tied up a lot of resources there on a circumstance that was a large set of misunderstandings and miscommunications.
That brings up another point that I wanted to ask you about, because you did serve in the military.
I did.
Did you have that instant connection with Gene when you met him on that? Did you meet him on Veterans Day?
I did. I did. And Gene and I hit it off right away. I see in Gene a lot of things that I see in the soldiers that I served with, who I hold in the highest regard. Those were some very, very interesting soldiers and very, very interesting times, and we did some very special things. And Gene's got that same capability. I would have welcomed Gene in my unit. And it's not in my unit, in our unit, because it's a band of brothers in the military. So yeah, we had a kinship. I wasn't a Marine, of course, but you know, I was the next best thing, I guess. I was a Ranger to him.
He's a Ranger, so he's all right in my book.
What's next for you, Gene?
I've talked about this a lot with my family and close friends, and you know, I really look up to Skip, and I mean, I want to be able to do for somebody else what he's done for me. So I'm thinking about going to law school and becoming a criminal defense, specifically a criminal defense attorney.
What do your friends and family tell you about that decision?
They're supportive. They think it's, I lived through this for a reason, and I think I found it, you know. So that's, when all the dust settles, that's what I'll be working on. Also finishing my master's degree that I was working on when all this happened.
UT.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been working on getting readmitted and doing that, but so that's the short-term goal right now.
Just one question. There was a request, and I said I wanted to talk to you, and Skip said, we can do it, but we want the American flag in the backdrop. Maybe you can just tell me what that means to you.
So the police officers that shot me identified my apartment with the American flag that was hanging on my living room wall. That's the American flag that I took to Iraq with me and kept with me every day. Now, I didn't hang it up or anything. I kept it in my pack, and I told my buddies, you know, if anything happens to me, cover my body with this. When I got back, there was no blood, and it was perfect, and it's been hanging on my wall ever since. That's in the courtroom also. When I would get really, really nervous, I would just look at the flag and just, it's comforting. It's comforting for me. That was my only request.
Hoorah.
Hoorah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for everything